When the Monkees first toured Australia in 1968, fans were hospitalised for hysteria. And 50 years later, the fans of the Monkees are just as passionate. Michael Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz are the only surviving members of the hit band.
The Monkees were once the darlings of 1960s music, but their history is full of tragedy. From records of substance use to personal struggles, health issues, demise, and even band members mostly not liking each other. Join us as we unveil the tragic details of the Monkees. During the music era of 1966 to 1968, former Child stars Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz, along with Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith, successfully competed with the Beatles, Beach Boys, and Rolling Stones at that time. Their music and youth culture sitcom won the Emmy Award for Best Comedy Series. But with the rise of the American band came many tragedies among themselves, in the industry, and outside their band. In the early stages, the band members were displeased that the music publishing company would not allow them to play their instruments on their records, use more of their material, or take hold of their creative freedom. As time went on, the band members who never got along, even as a group, decided it was time for them to pursue their different musical careers, as the usual tensions within their group were increasing. As Peter Tork decided to also quit the group due to how tired he was with the tensions that arose, following their split and other tensions that arose, some of the bandmates were faced with critical health conditions, personal and family challenges, and a series of quarrels amongst themselves. The Monkees were formed in Los Angeles during the period when filmmaker Bob Rafelson developed the initial idea for the Monkees in 1962 and tried selling it to Revue Productions, the television division of Universal Pictures, but was unsuccessful. By the break of May 1964, while working at Screen Gems, Rafelson teamed up with Bert Schneider, whose father, Abraham Schneider, headed the Colpix Records and Screen Gems television units of Columbia Pictures. Immediately, Rafelson and Schneider decided to form the Raybert Productions. According to them, the Beatles' films, A Hard Day's Night and Help, was what inspired them to revive Rafelson's idea for the Monkees. Working together as Raybert Productions, they were able to sell the show to Screen Gems Television on the 16th of April, 1965. As a group, at some point, the Monkees had to endure some form of disrespect from critics for not being formed originally or organically like other bands, although the story behind their formation wasn't the initial intent of the founders. Rafelson and Schneider's original idea was to cast an existing New York folk rock group, the Lovin' Spoonful, who were not widely known then, but it didn't eventually pull through. The success of the Beatles movies inspired them to do something similar with an American sitcom, and that's how the Monkees were born. Unlike other bands, the members of the Monkees didn't come together the way bands traditionally do. Instead, they auditioned and were selected separately. This time, not especially for their musical talent, but more for the things that work for TV sitcoms at that time. Some of the attributes the organizers had in mind were charisma, good looks, and acting skills. Still, at least two of the band's members later selected were accomplished musicians, while the other two also had decent musical ideas. Colgum's records executive Don Kirshner was hired to oversee the musical aspects of the show. Coincidentally, most bands started in a garage, but unlike them, the Monkees started at Raybert Productions as a band of funny guys who also played music. In an attempt to find who the actual Monkees would be, Rafelson and Schneider placed an ad in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. The caption was Madness Auditions, where they requested folk and roll musicians and singers to come in for acting roles in new TV series. Part of the requirement was that they needed 4 insane boys between the ages of 17 and 21 with the courage to work. Just like other sitcoms, the actors were expected to play characters, which meant no one ever intended for the Monkees to write their stuff themselves. As for their music, it was to be pre-recorded, with the band providing vocals only. Just after they were able to release their first single and played a few shows with the management fully in control, the Monkees at that time became somehow known as the Prefab Four, more like a play on the Beatles' nickname, the Fab Four. Following the advert, the producers were eventually able to audition hundreds of actors and musicians. About a total of 437 persons were interviewed. It was even recorded that among the notable names who appeared for the same interview was Danny Hutton and Paul Williams. By the time the auditions were done, Rafelson and Schneider were able to find 3 out of 4 of the band members they needed through the long audition process. Well, The fourth slot was supposed to go to seasoned folk musician Stephen Stills. By the time they needed him to finally come in, Stills turned down the chance to be a Monkee, and instead, he gave them a recommendation for who can be his potential replacement: Peter Thorkelson. Thorkelson was someone whom Rafelson had played with in New York, and whom he thought shared the exact look the producers needed to complete the band. Thorkelson then had to also adopt the stage name Peter Tork, while also singing and playing bass in the band. Years later, in an interview, he mentioned that he was hired to be an actor in a TV show, and somehow the producers did have hopes that something musical would come out of them when they cast the four boys on the show. Additionally, he mentioned that if they were not able to do the music at that time, the producers would have been all right with them just making the TV show. The other three boys to join the band included Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, and Michael Nesmith. By the break of 1966, the Monkees had their debut being very creative. They also filled the screen with their charisma, and it starred four young men with long hair who wore a particular type of clothes and were all about playing rock and roll music. Although the show used quick cuts and also had the actors breaking character, with some camera tricks and some music videos which came at the end of each episode, all of these combined to make a series that was able to fully embrace and express the pop rock feel of the Monkees. They also made lots of catchy, fun songs that left millions of their fans with sweet memories. Aside from that, their style was straightforward, and the theme song from the Monkees, which has to be the biggest banger of a sitcom opener ever, was a viral rhyme. In one instance, John Lennon famously referred to them as the Marx Brothers in recognition of their comedy chops. Well, as time went by, Lennon had to sit back and watch the Monkees, whom he had referred to as Marx Brothers, sell more albums than he did. By the break of 1967, they even sold more albums than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. As a band, they had 2 Emmys and sold 50 million records. Despite the controversies and backlash they received, there was no doubt that what they had was exactly what music fans of the 1960s were looking for. While the band was getting famous and selling records, their big longing for independence came knocking. By the break of January 1967, bandmates Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith got angry when they listened to their second album, More of the Monkees. They mentioned that the album was more of recycled music from the show. At that point, the group decided to take a stand and were going to demand creative control over their materials. At that time, the band was more of a sensation, and the producers couldn't afford to fire them or replace them with those who would agree to the terms. Due to this, the Monkees finally became the real band that critics had for so long accused them of not being. For the Monkees, getting their independence was more like they also got the freedom to disagree and also showcase their creative differences. By the time their third and fourth albums were released, they were both successful. But by the fifth album, The Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees, things started to get out of place. Within this period, the television series was canceled and the band wasn't happy with the sitcom format and thought it should be more of a variety show. That was mostly okay though, because the band was already working on their first movie. By the time the Monkees would feature in a movie in 1968 titled Head, the screenplay was written by Jack Nicholson. At that time, the band brainstormed the film while they were so high at a party, and then Nicholson brought up the ideas together into a screenplay while he was also on substances. Putting things together, they ended up making a weird, plotless film. To the iconic Monkees, the film was a failure considering their successes in music and sitcoms. It was also stated that the film was poorly advertised, while audiences that saw the movie were confused, and many tagged it as a flop. The movie, Head, was more like the beginning and the end of the Monkees' film career, with its box office performance disappointing everyone. Among the members of the band, Peter Tork seemed more like the person who was affected the most. During an interview in 2011, he mentioned that the movie dropped like a ball of dark stars. He went further to mention that the simile of a rock in the water is too mild for how badly that movie did. Following the weekend after Head's West Coast premiere, the band got together again to work on a television special, unknown to them that their split was at the corner, alongside a series of tragedies that was going to start playing out. Let's get into the details. In the weeks following, Tork had to leave the band. At that point, they were left with the other 3 members, who then decided to keep things running for a couple of albums, but failed to make any new hits. By the end of 1969, Nesmith also decided to leave the band This was after he had already released a solo album and felt like he was going to do better being a solo artist. As for Jones and Dolenz, they decided to record a final album together, but this version of the Monkees was clearly nothing close to what the band had once been recognized for. By the break of 1970, it was pretty obvious that the Monkees were headed nowhere. To make their split official, the band officially broke up after that last album, and the iconic band, the Monkees, came to an end. Following the split, the members of the band took their separate paths, although things did not go as smoothly as expected. For Peter Tork, he decided to form his band called Release. It was said that the band even got separated before they even had a single record. After trying to form the band, he went on and attempted to start a production company, which also went nowhere. All through most part of 1970s, Tork continued to struggle. At a point, the former Monkees bandmate ran out of money and was forced to rent his home to a friend just so he can at least avoid foreclosure. During this time, he had a pregnant girlfriend whom he ended up moving into David Crosby's basement with. That wasn't all of the troubles for Tork. While all of these were going on, he was arrested for possession of substances and had to spend 3 months in an Oklahoma prison. Following that incident, he decided to let go of everything that connected him to the music industry. He went on to take a job as a high school teacher, teaching high school math and music and coaching baseball. As usual, tragedy was silently waiting around the corner. After some time, he had difficulty with the structure of the school system and ended up getting fired. Tork then got involved in extreme drinking habits that persisted into the early 1980s. His drinking habits no doubt contributed to his lack of professional success. Fortunately, Tork was able to turn things around when he decided to quit drinking in the early 80s. Aside from that, he was also able to stop his extreme use of substances. Following his separation from these habits, he was finally able to revive his music career. Among the bandmates, Michael Nesmith was faced with his share of personal struggles and tragedies. It's often said that nothing is scarier than the IRS, except maybe sharks. Most people try their best to make sure that they go through life without getting to have any troubles with the IRS. Following the separation of the Monkees 4, Michael Nesmith was faced with issues from the IRS. According to him, he mentioned that they showed up with a huge bill for unpaid taxes and started seizing property. So afterwards, he was left with nothing to show for it. But that's not the only tragedy. His family was also crumbling. After the IRS took all his stuff, his marriage collapsed, and he was faced with the pain of dealing with his emotions in the most toxic way possible. He mentioned that during this time, he was basically at a career and personal rock bottom. He had no opportunities as an actor, a player, a singer, a songwriter, or a producer. Everything crumbled right before his eyes. Mickey Dolenz also spent a lot of years doing not very much of anything. For a while, his main selling point was not his success as an actor or his vocal talents. It was the fact that he was that kid from the Monkees. At least it was able to earn him some small television roles and a few voice acting credits on cartoons like Scooby-Doo and Captain Caveman. By the break of 1976, Dolenz was headed to the UK to star in a musical. So out of all the former Monkees, Dolenz's path was not as tragic as the rest of the bandmates who decided to pursue their solo career, although some of them ended up being more successful than others. Nesmith went on to form a country rock group called the First National Band, and they were able to hit number 21 with the single Joanne, making him the only Monkee with a solo hit. At the time, the parent company Warner Cable thought of having a 24-hour cable network that aired just videos, and a year later, they created MTV, which they asked Nesmith to help develop. While things were beginning to look like it, more tragedies were unfolding. Let's get into all of the details. During the period MTV was involved with members of the band, 3 of the Monkees, Dolenz, Jones, and Tork, were able to get together for their anniversary reunion tour in 1986, which resulted in an unexpected hit. By the break of 1990s, the former Monkees were all off doing their own things. But the 30th anniversary was approaching, and the band got together to talk about the impending anniversary. They also discovered that somehow they still had some musical chemistry and went ahead and recorded another album. The 1996 albums titled Eustace became the first Monkees record written and produced entirely by Nesmith, Tork, Jones, and Dolenz. Following the album, things were going pretty well until they decided to start touring again. At this point, it was more like all of their creative differences and personal senses of not liking one another started to come to the open. It wasn't long after Nesmith dropped out of the tour early. At another time, the remaining band members toured again in 2001, but this time it was Tork who abandoned the band, although Jones and Dolenz said they had fired him. While speaking during an interview, Tork later complained that Jones and Dolenz drank so much on the tour that they became mean and were beginning to act oddly. But it wasn't just Tork clashing with Jones and Dolenz. As time went on, Jones and Dolenz weren't getting along either. At a time, Jones mentioned that he couldn't imagine sharing a stage with Mickey Dolenz ever. As time went by, it looked as if things weren't going so well for Michael Nesmith. It wasn't long before he came down with some mystery illness. By the break of 2010, to crown things up, his wife also left him, and in the middle of all of that emotional pain he was going through, he started going blind. Nesmith had lost his sight to cataracts, and at the same time, he also lost his flexibility to an undiagnosed condition that crippled him, which made it difficult and painful for him to walk. It got so worse that he was helpless. Fortunately, Nesmith's blindness was reversible, as the cataract surgery performed on him was able to restore his sight, but his mysterious illness was more difficult to overcome because no one knew what it was. The illness left him largely unable to use his left hand, and his right foot was useless enough that he had to drag it when he walked. And to make matters worse, the specialists he visited mostly offered him pain medication. The illness eventually went away on its own. According to Nesmith, who was a Christian Scientist at that time, he believed that prayer and meditation contributed greatly to his health bouncing back. For the Monkees, their track record of not being able to stay together peacefully had a way of never ending, no matter how badly they wanted them to get along. The Monkees then decided to get together again in 2011 and also went on tour without Michael Nesmith, who by then had inherited the liquid paper fortune and apparently didn't really need to tour anymore. Their 45th anniversary tour actually went well, although after a summer of traveling around North America, the band members, who were all well into their 60s, had to conclude and decided not to add more dates to the tour. Tragically, by the following year, Davy Jones passed on due to a heart attack. Jones' passing came as a big shock to the industry. Following the loss, Michael Nesmith then decided to join the remaining two Monkees for a short set of reunion performances, each of which featured a tribute to their fallen bandmate. Following the break of February 2019, the Monkees received their most recent blow when Peter Tork finally succumbed to the rare form of head and neck cancer he'd been battling with for a decade. At first, he was diagnosed with adenoid cystic carcinoma 2 years before the band's 45th year reunion tour. By 2011, he mentioned that the surgery he had undergone to remove the cancer had been a success. Following Tork's passing, the two remaining Monkees posted heartfelt messages in their bandmate's honor. By the early 1986, MTV aired every episode of the Monkees in the form of a weekend marathon. All of a sudden, the 20-year-old show was the biggest thing among kids who weren't alive when it first aired. Almost every date on the Monkees reunion tour sold out, and the newly recorded single that was then, This Is Now, was able to hit the top 20. By the break of 1986, the Monkees and MTV enjoyed a mutual relationship with lots of reruns from the band's old sitcom, which brought about huge ratings to the channel. Aside from that, the exposure from MTV also made the Monkees reunion tour a big success. By 2014, the Monkees were inducted into the Pop Music Hall of Fame at the 2014 Monkees Convention. During that time, Dolenz and Tork toured as the Monkees in 2015 without Nesmith. It was stated that Nesmith was busy with other ventures, although Dolenz said that he was welcome to join them if he wanted to. By the break of February 2016, Dolenz announced that the Monkees would be releasing a new album titled Good Times as a celebration of their 50th anniversary. It also featured contributions by all three surviving members, as well as a posthumous contribution from Jones through vocals he had recorded in the 1960s. The album was released in May 2016 and was a huge success, reaching number 14 on the Billboard 200. As a result of the rebirth and success of the reformed Monkees on the charts and on the road, the entertainment world hungered for a full Monkees reboot. But this time, they decided to use the Monkees model from the late 1960s to launch an entirely new band. To the world, this meant the launch of new members, new songs, a new sitcom, and the new Monkees. At this time, Columbia Records decided to create New Monkees, After they auditioned, several young men with musical ability and, like old times, decided to select 4: Jared Chandler and Larry Saltis on guitar, Dino Kovas on drums, and Marty Ross on bass. In this group, Ross had the most experience in music and TV, having played for a real band called the Whigs and serving as a writing staff of a soap opera. New Monkees was sold into television, although after 13 of their planned 22 episodes had aired somehow. The Monkees' magic was gone and didn't have the same magical feeling like the actual The Monkees. Behind the numerous pop hits they had, members of the Monkees were faced with substance use, personal issues, to battles over creative control, which ultimately led to their downfall. The shocking reality of their story is a deep reminder that fame is not always a fairy tale, and the pressures of stardom can take a devastating toll in people. Despite their struggles, the Monkees' legacy as trailblazers in the pop music industry has stood the test of time, leaving behind a bittersweet chapter in the history of American entertainment. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.